I vividly remember, Chris, fighting for life. Now, if someone would say, what does that mean? I'd say, well, I felt like there was a choice to stay or go. Was that drug induced? Absolutely, because it's trying to keep me alive. So I was doing all that I could to survive. What can you do? Well, you hope, right? So fortunately, when I did come out of the coma, the pain was excruciating, but at the same time, I was heavily medicated. So I was able to say to my dad, my last recollection is I was riding a bike. How is my bike? And Dad's like, you know what, son, let's not worry about that. At the moment, we've got bigger things to worry about. But you can see as an athlete, and a mindset, which you would appreciate, that's what mattered at the time. It was difficult to go through that transition in ICU. You've been through that process, so you understand. But I have an attitude of gratitude because, I shouldn't be here. How many people do you know who get hit by a truck, 8 tons, going 110 kilometers an hour and hit someone on a bicycle? So generally that doesn't end well for the person on the bicycle.
Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where I talk with experts in the experience of being human, those who've taken the risk to realize their dreams and live fully. Today, I think you'll see that with my good friend, John Maclean. After an 8-ton truck hit him while on a training ride for a triathlon, broke his back in the hospital, his father said to him, how far can you go? Obviously, this was coming from a dark place. Well, how far? I mean, did Olympics, Paralympics, swam the English Channel, was the first paraplegic to finish in a qualifying time at the Ironman, has also gone back to the triathlon that he was training for, the Nippian triathlon, and has done it without a wheelchair. So he's done some crazy technology, therapy, and we want to get into that. But John, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Chris, so good to see you again, my friend.
I know we were just saying it's been a long time. We were assuming it's been about since 2005. It doesn't feel like that long because we raced wheelchairs together and raced together in Sydney back in 2000. What did that mean for you back at the time? Because you're a guy who was pushing the envelope in everything. I mean, you were an aspiring junior rugby player, or ascending rugby player, it sounded like, but also doing triathlons. I mean, has this always been who you are? And when your father said, how far can you go? Was that bringing you back to who you really were?
Let me think about the best way to answer that question. What was I doing leading into Sydney? So is it okay to go back a little bit, which kind of frames that up? I'm the baby, older brother Mark, 3 years, older sister Mary in 2 years. So I'm the baby. And where we grew up, we would go and watch the Penrith Panthers play, and they would play against the Rabbitohs, one of the football teams here. And it started as a dream as a kid. So Dad would get us our uniform, and we would support the local team. And then that's where it started for me. And it was a dream. And the dream was, imagine if I could run on and play. Imagine there's like a little boy like me watching. Imagine. And then I used to have a piece of paper and hope that some of the players might take the time to sign something for me. Some did, some did not. Fast forward time, I was then one of those players. So first grade is like the top. I was kind of playing the level under that. And it was nice to be able to sign autographs for kids. And so that's the transition. Then I had my accident.
How were you doing triathlon and rugby at the same time? Is that how it was working?
Yeah, so a buddy of mine, often the case, right? These opportunities, I believe, are there for all of us all the time. And this piece on being human, I love that. And I guess it's just, are you, I know you have been, but are we as a collective also open to opportunities? Do we have our ears and eyes open to opportunities? So I was looking for something. And after doing the English Channel, I thought, okay, what's the next opportunity? And I thought, gee, it'd be great.
But hold on a second. The English Channel you did after the accident, though, right?
Okay, so sequentially, I'll share that. Yeah. So leading back to that, my friend, he was a fitness instructor, and he said there's a new sport. It's called a triathlon. You kind of swim, you bike, and you run. He goes, "Let's do it, and I'm going to beat you." So he threw the challenge, and I didn't swim as a kid. I used to run. That was, I guess, something what I loved to run. That was what I was good at. And so he threw the challenge, and I won the first race. He won the second race, and I was training for the third race when I got hit by the truck. So,
Were you a big guy at the time? I mean, you were a rugby player, right? So you were.
yeah. So I was kind of fast. I was the guy who was on the what they call the wing or the outside, and the rugby you kind of get the ball a lot of cases to the wingers, and they run and hopefully put the ball over the line and score a try. So that was my asset, was my speed. I could run quite fast. So that's what I was doing at the time. In the winter is when you play football, and summer was kind of athletics or triathlon. So that's what I was, to complement me being a football player. I took up the challenge of wanting to do this triathlon, and I was in the process of hopefully winning the third race when I got hit by the truck.
Wow. Now, you said you didn't swim. Not knowing how to swim is a really painful experience when you're trying to do a triathlon. I mean, swimming, I mean, running it kind of like you run, right? But when you're an inefficient swimmer because you don't know how, it really hurts. How long did it take you to learn how to swim? It sounds like you learned relatively quickly.
So yeah, so I did breaststroke for the swim opposed to freestyle. So I wasn't comfortable in water. I was comfortable on land, but that was part of the challenge. So Colin was my friend. He's my friend who asked me to challenge him. So he beat me out of the water, and then on the bike, it was chasing him down, and then on the run is when I caught him, and that's when I won. And the following year, I was a little bit better because I started to go to the pool to get a sense of, what is this stroke like? But still very poor. And I think the third time I was starting to get the hang of swimming. So that's what I was training for when I had my accident. I think it would have been close to the third race, so we'll never know. But I'm grateful. Back to opportunity. I'm grateful that he threw out a challenge, and I was open to it. But I guess that's what closed that door on a rugby career.
Close the door on the rugby career, but then the idea of how far can you go? You seemed like you said open to challenges, right? There's another challenge, but the challenge initially probably seemed overwhelming. I mean, they were talking about oak or mahogany kind of thing when they brought you into the hospital, right? There was not a lot of hope of you doing any of the things you've done or even making it through the day, really. What do you tap into? Because that's always the question for people, right? Is like, people probably say to you, well, I could never do that. I could never do what you've done. And people say it to me as well. And I think, well, the first part was just the getting started part.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. You touched on a nerve there, Chris. So thank you for your research. Yeah, exactly. So doctors often, because I'm friends with a lot of surgeons, doctors have conversations when they're operating because, that's what they do. And we're very grateful that they can. So the conversation at the time was, mahogany or pine, because, it's not looking good. Obviously, they do their best and I have so much love and respect for people, first responders, and who keep us alive at scenes of accidents and those things. So the surgeon said to my dad, we don't expect him to live, so you should prepare yourself for that. Now that's tough to hear at any time, but so that was the first thing. When I first came out of the coma, which was 4 days later, ironically, I'm obviously dazed and I don't know where I am, and I'm kind of frightened, and all your walls are obliterated. There's just the essence of being a human. Or
But you were asking about your bike too, right?
Well, I was leading to that. So
I'm sorry, I'm stealing your thunder.
No, not at all. It's beautiful that you've done the research to be able to pivot at the time. So for me, I vividly remember, Chris, fighting for life. Now, if someone would say, what does that mean? I'd say, well, I felt like there was a choice to stay or go. I felt that. Was that drug induced? Absolutely, because they're trying to keep me alive. But I really felt like I had a choice in that. So I was doing all that I could to survive. What can you do? Well, you hope, right? So fortunately, when I did come out of the coma, the pain was excruciating, but at the same time, I was heavily medicated. So I was able to say to my dad, my last recollection is I was riding a bike. How is my bike? And Dad's like, you know what, son, let's not worry about that. At the moment, we've got bigger things to worry about. But you can see as an athlete, you know, in a mindset, which you would appreciate, that's what mattered at the time. So it was difficult to go through that transition in ICU. You've been through that process, so you understand. So for me, the other guy on the other side of the room, he'd broken his neck. So he was a quad, riding a motorbike, complete, I think C4, cervical region 4. So completely relying on everybody for everything. And that's when I started to realize two things. One is that I'm so lucky to be alive, like a gratitude. That's again hard to, but I have an attitude of gratitude because, you know, I shouldn't be here. How many people do you know who get hit by a truck, 8 tons, you know, going 110 kilometers an hour? I think maybe 65 miles. Chris, just trying to give that something around there.
So 60, I think 68, right? 68, 69 miles an hour. Yeah.
Yep. So it's a big truck going really fast and hit someone on a bicycle. So generally that doesn't end well for the person on the bicycle. So very grateful for life. And the other one is that I was always thinking when I was in the hospital, what am I going to do now? Because I felt that was the end of, in my mind, the world. I love to run. I love to play football. But in actual fact, it was a pivoting point again for more opportunities. So when Dad had said to me, which is probably 12 months after my accident, so I was doing weights with my best buddy to kind of build myself up and get confidence and trying to build a wall again and, you know, see myself as being equal to others. That was one of the things I really struggled with, Chris, to share with you, is pre-accident, I'm a footballer. That's how I kind of identified myself with my sense of self. And then, you know, after that, I'm categorized as someone the language was disabled, which in my mind was, you're less than everybody else. To diss someone is not to encourage, it's the complete opposite. So I really struggle with that, saying, do you know what? I'm still me. I just use a wheelchair now to get around, opposed to, so that was challenging. So anyway, that's where I was. And my dad had said to me about 12 months afterwards, when I was hopeful that I was going to get back to where I was, because my family doctor, and these are the right people at the right time in our lives, Dr. Gabriel was his name. He came to visit me in hospital in the spinal unit, and he said, John, don't worry. You're going to be bigger, you're going to be stronger, and you're going to be faster, and left the room. So what did he do? Well, he provided a seed of hope in a very dark environment. So I'm very grateful for him for doing that. So therefore, I then thought, I'm going to go back and play football. I'm going to go back and run. I'm going to go back and get access to the beach. I'm going to go to start to create all these pictures in my head.
Which are dreams, really, right? I mean, dreams are a life source.
Yes. So, and I think if I look back on my life, the little boy within, you know, here I am at 57. Where did that go, Chris? But there's still a little boy who's alive and well and still loves to chase dreams. So there's a nice piece. I think when we're kids, we get fascinated by our dreams, and some of us chase the dreams. As we get older, we apply brakes and we start to tell ourselves that that's childish, or, you know, that we can find excuses not to do that.
Or irresponsible. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think back to my dad, 12 months after the accident, I was training really hard to see whether these dreams could come back to life. And I had a moment with my dad, and he was a strong man, Scotsman, very stoic, and never saw him cry. That never happened at all until I cried in front of him, which he then cried. And that was a beautiful moment for a father and son. And when all that kind of calmed down, and it had to be him, Chris, because I was holding on to a lot, and it's important to let go. And it's easy to say, but often hard to do. So back to Dad, there was a pause, and he looked at me and he said, son, you survived getting hit by a truck, and that landed. It needed to be 12 months for him to say that for me. And then he followed that up with, you know, how far can you go? what a beautiful question. And it's allowed me to chase some dreams from that moment on.
Did those dreams manifest themselves in anything specific in that moment when he said, how far can you go? Does it get to be a concrete kind of thing of like, that's the thing I want to do. That's the thing. Because you've been a guy, I mean, crossing the English Channel. I want to get to crossing the English Channel. Was that the first big one? That is the busiest shipping lane in the world. 12 hours, 55 minutes, 59 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it's not warm.
That's true. Answering your question, the first big one was Hawaii, to Kona.
Oh, Kona was the first one before the
channel.
Okay.
So I think if you looked at what was next from that moment with Dad, how far can you go? I accepted at that time that a wheelchair is going to be a part of, because I present as an incomplete T12 paraplegic, meaning I could hobble around on crutches, weight on left side, right side, more paralysis, and I'm very, very grateful for what I am able to do with my spinal cord injury. And therefore that was like, okay, the wheelchair is it. So what can that look like? And I'm glad I did do that, because there was a big fear around that. And only because the doctor said you're going to be bigger, faster, and stronger. And I took that to mean something very different. He was saying that life's going to be different. And because I spoke to him many years later, why did you say that? And his response was that you were broken. And I absolutely was. And he said, that came to me. So grateful that he was able to deliver that as my doctor, which again had an impact. So then I went, okay, this is it. And when I had built myself up, with my best buddy, Jono, doing the weights, and then it's like, okay, what can we do now? And it's like, acceptance is what we need to do now. So I accept the fact that I need a wheelchair to help me move around. And that's when my best buddy said, well, let's do the triathlon you're training for, and in the wheelchair. And initially I said to him, I only want to do it with you, and I only want to do it the day before, because I was very insecure, uncomfortable. I mean, all the things that Chris.
Sure.
Because it's such a different environment, isn't it? Coming from a spinal unit, flat and safe, to life, which is not necessarily flat and safe. So credit to my best friend, because he then challenged me and pushed back. He said, no, you're going to do it with me and everybody else. That's it. So he was pushing me out of my comfort zone. My comfort zone was, I believe I can do it, and you're the person I feel comfortable to do it with. But what he was saying was, this is another piece of acceptance, that, you're my buddy. You were my buddy before the accident, you're my buddy after the accident. Let's just face whatever we need to face and get on with it. And that was good, because I managed to cross the finish line, and I was given a hand cycle trial, the Freedom Rider back in the day. Anyway, so I crossed the finish line, and that then, here in Australia, I was watching Wide World of Sports, which is a sporting event. And it kind of focused on the Hawaiian Ironman. And that's like, wow, there's an opportunity. Maybe there was a guy competing, an American called John Franks. He raced in 1994. And then I found out I needed to race against him, and whoever won as a demonstration in Panama City, Florida, half Ironman, will get a chance to go to Kona 1995. So that's where it kind of started. Dad said, how far can you go? I accepted the fact that I needed the chair. I let go of the dream of running and playing football. My friends surrounded me to say, well, let's see what you can do. Like, we're here to help you. So that was the first big, and Ironman took me 3 attempts to make all the cutoff times. And then after that, back to your point on the channel, I was at a local pool, and I met a gentleman who'd swum the channel, and he simply said to me, if I can do it, so can you. Right?
So you're susceptible to this inspiration, to this to suggestion, I guess. Susceptible to suggestion. If I can do it, you can do it. And you're, oh, okay.
Well, I tell you what happened. So we'll go back to being the boy, right? And I believe, this is my personal view, the little boy in you is alive and well. The question is, when's the last time you tapped into that smaller version of self? Okay. So I shared with you that when I was a kid, I'd had dreams of being, a football player, right? Maybe I played reserve grade or second grade, and first grade was the top one. So I went close. And then I was like, I dreamed about being an athlete as a kid. So when the door of my accident transition, I felt that was lost. I was never going to happen. In actual fact, when I accepted that the door was closed, locked, bolted, throw the key away, like it's closed, don't try and keep going there because you will not succeed. When I accepted that, then it was like, wow, I need to open a new door. And Chris, when I opened a new door, there were new opportunities because you're starting from a blank canvas. You've got a piece of paper in front of you with a pencil, and do you choose to pick it up and start to create something? And it's back to dream. And then I went, maybe I could be a wheelchair athlete. What would that look like? So after doing, Ironman, which I then saw myself as being equal, and as you said, I met this guy at the pool who swam the channel, and I thought, okay, I'm now sponsored by Nike. I'm now sponsored by Gatorade. I'm now sponsored by. I need to do something to justify that sponsorship, and that's why the English Channel was the next challenge.
And Ironman, I mean, when you look at Ironman too, right? I mean, you talk about being an equal to the other competitors, to the other people in some ways on the street as well, right? I mean, this is where it's all going in your mind. But Ironman is just, I mean, this is you against the elements, against the race, against yourself. And so, because what is it? It's 2.1 mile swim,
2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, marathon, 26.2 marathon.
I mean, that is a ridiculous. So how long did that take you when you finally qualified? How long did that take you?
So I'll share that day with you because it was a long day, but I'll give you an abbreviated version. That it's beautiful here, and it's nice to have this conversation with you because you can relate on a different level. Meaning, that was my mountain to climb.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunity was presented because I saw it on television. An Australian guy had won it for the first time, a guy called Greg Welsh.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the first time a non-American had won the event. And when he crossed the line, he had a flag, right? And he leaped into the air and he had his flag. So that painted a picture in my mind. And that was, maybe I could do that. Maybe. So maybe then leads to, well, are you in or are you out? So, okay, I'm in. What do I do? Well, I need to find out about the event. Spoke to the race director. She then said, whoever wins the half Ironman in Panama City, Florida, will get a chance to go to Kona 95. So I won that. So now here I am.
Well, and what kind of a battle was that? Was there a battle? Was it head to head? How did that
work? John Franks was the gentleman who I looked up to because I saw him on television and he's opening the doors for others. So he opened the door to Ironman. Very grateful for him for doing that. So John swam backstroke, and by this time, Chris, I could swim. So I had spent a lot of time in the pool.
No more breaststroke.
Yeah, I'd moved away from breaststroke, and freestyle was now my stroke of choice. So I beat John comfortably out of the swim, and then I was on the handbike, which is again half Ironman distance. So I came off the bike, and I didn't see him after that. So I think he pulled out after the bike because he realized I was a fair way ahead and he wasn't going to be able to make up that time. So then, okay, that's the first step, if you will, or the first stroke. And then here I am now lining up in 1995 doing Ironman. My swim was an hour 7. Friends get you in and out of the water. Again, this is a demonstration at this stage. And Ironman thought, let's wait and see what happens because maybe he is unable to make the cutoff times. So I'm on the handbike, turn around, and as you know, out there in Kona on the Big Island, you got the heat, the wind, and the hills. So the trade winds turn in the afternoon. So for me, there was a headwind all the way there, turned around, headwind all the way back. So, I'm not exaggerating. I learned very quickly on that day that Mother Nature runs the race. You want to climb a mountain, call it Kilimanjaro. You want to swim a body of water, call it the English Channel. Well, it ultimately depends on whether the mountain or the ocean allows you to have that opportunity. So anyway, I missed the bike cutoff by 40 minutes, but was asked to go on because we're still in a demonstration. So officially disqualified, but can it be completed? So I finished in 14 hours 52.
14 hours and 52 minutes. Wow, that's a long day.
Yes. And I was, here's another one about the human spirit, because we talk about, being human. My best friend, Jono, was there to say the right thing at the right time, as was my dad, as was my doctor. I shared a couple of examples. So in my mind, I was like, I'm done. I had enough. So it's a funny little story, because I'm going up the last big hill on the bike, on the hand cycle, to get to the top of the hill. So, little gear trying to get to the top. And it gave him the opportunity to have a conversation. And he said, you got to go on. I was like, no, I'm done. And he said, well, you have to keep on going. And I said, well, the swim took me 1 hour 7. I've been on this hand cycle now for 10 hours and 40 minutes. I'm a little tired. So Chrissy's response was beautiful. He said, well, it's my son's birthday today, and I'm not with him. Right here, right? Right here. So I'm like,
no choice.
I was like, no choice. Okay, I'm going on. I'm going on for you, not me. I'm done. But because you came to visit me in hospital once a week for 4 months, because you've stood by me, I'm going on. And what does that mean? And again, I know that that we all have more. It's just often we don't access that more because we have other conversations. So I was pushed to the brink. He then found more in me. And then I finished, as I said, went back the next year. I got a flat on the bike again as the only wheelchair athlete in a demonstration event. 96, missed the bike cutoff by 15 minutes due to a flat. Again, disqualified. Again, asked to continue. 14 hours 39. Went back the next year, and here's the nice piece. Went back the next year, and Ironman said it's going to happen. So now let's have our first wheelchair category. So the first 3 men that went through in a place called Lubbock,
Texas, right?
Were then going to be the first 3 athletes, and they're going to have the first category. So I was very fortunate to win that first category, Chris. And the door's now open to any male, female who wants to take on the challenge of doing Ironman, as it is for para-triathlon, as you know. So nice to have been able to possibly play a part in opening the doors for others.
Well, yeah, and obviously, I mean, opening the doors for others sounds simpler than almost 15 hours of just pain. I mean, just probably blood coming out of your tears, kind of thing, and then finally making it, because there was a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into training just to have the opportunity to get to the starting line. What did that, in the moment when you qualified, so you're finally, because it's in the dark, right? By the time you're finishing, it's in the dark, and you recognize that you've made it through the bike, which was the big challenge, right? Because even though you weren't as good a wheelchair racer as you would become, you knew that you'd be faster than the runners, or at least the vast majority of runners in the marathon. But still, when you finished, because I mean, who knows, right? Your arms could fall off, but in the marathon, what was that moment like? Was it a personal moment? Was it a moment where you're thinking about your buddy Jono, where you're thinking about your dad, where you're thinking about those people who will go behind you? What do you think in that moment?
Well, you're right. The bike at that stage was always the challenge. And the technology is very different today than it was back then. And that's awesome, because as you may have seen, some of the hand bikes now, you're virtually lying down, which is a lot more aerodynamic than if you're kind of sitting upright like we are. So what was I thinking? The other guy that I trained with in Florida is a guy called Scott McNeese. I was thinking of trying to stay in front of him. My swimming was better than his. And there was another guy, Randy Cadell. He's a great guy, blonde hair, kind of like a beast, great guy. So, you want to stay ahead of those guys, right? Which I think if you talk about the top pro men and male and females, they're trying to stay ahead of the competition, so they're giving themselves a chance to win. So I was thinking about a lot of things, because my time in 97 was 12 hours 21. So obviously I dropped a fair bit of time. It's just that momentum to keep on going and, stay where you are. So you think of a lot of different things when you're pushing yourself up against the wall, but you're truly testing yourself. right? And that doing Kilimanjaro with planks coming on and the terrain not looking ideal, and I didn't expect this, and kind of the challenge are always presented to all of us all the time. So I found myself to go, do you know what? I chased a dream that was my mountain to climb, call it Ironman. And the good news is that I was able to cross the line. Yes, there's a medal around the neck, but more importantly, it was that I was capable of chasing the challenge. It took 3 attempts. Yes, it hurt. Yes, I pushed myself further than I ever have previously. So it was nice that the benefits of it, people can look at that all these years later and go, okay, there was a starting point. But I'm kind of more proud of the people who are around the team who enabled it to happen, because without them, there's no way in the world. So Jono played a big part in that, obviously. My doctor played a part. My dad was a huge part. I took my dad to the race in 1997. He was 70 at the time. And I just wanted to show him, hey, Dad. And my dream was that we won. And I wanted him to see that. Why? Because he's my dad. He saw me at my worst. Remember, the surgeon said, we don't expect him to live. Let's call that the worst. And now he was going to see me at my best. Right? I mean, he saw me playing football, obviously, but so it's about those memories, some that are worth holding on to, some are absolutely worth letting go. And that's one, for me, my dad's passed many years ago. That was a wonderful moment in time that we were able to share, and it was quite special. So you think of a lot of things when you're chasing a dream.
Which is kind of funny, right? Because it's sort of that statement to your dad of like, I'm okay. You don't need to worry about me anymore. Which, I think as a parent, I don't think you spend a day of your life where you're not worrying about your children, regardless of what your children are doing, who they are, or how proficient they are. But that's that I've recovered, I'm here, and I'm okay. What's next then? Do you say, okay, I've done that, and you've opened the door for so many people, but your father, along with your buddy who got you to do the triathlon, had thrown down the gauntlet for you, and you react well to the gauntlet. How far will you go? You'd already gone really, really far. And how does that fit? You said you had some sponsors. So there's a part of that too, right? Is like, how do I continue this relationship? But what's the next step after you finish Kona? I'm assuming there's a good night's sleep, maybe a beer or two. But after that, when does the dream rekindle and sort of reposition?
So I believe this is the case for everybody. And I know life is busy. So just in terms of priorities, whether you have a view, my view on that success, I'll come back to answer your question, is I think if you have a goal for yourself, that's important. Because when I looked in the mirror for the first time, Chris, in the spinal unit, you might recall, I didn't see anybody else. There was no one else looking back at me than me. So I thought, okay, there's a good one in the airline industry. You may have heard this a few times. In the event of something happening, please, fit your mask before fitting others. What is that saying? It's important that you breathe to help others to breathe. So I think of a mother, I think of kids. So back to, I needed to find something for me. And if I could do that, then maybe life would have some meaning. And then what's after that? Family, where you start and finish. That's a given. Next one is work, provide income to support. Makes sense. And the last one is the community piece, which is the giving back piece. So I kind of learned that early. And what I found was, Chris, when I was doing Ironman, it was the best extension of myself. I wasn't just going through the process, I was loving it. So I found out that and again, it was my challenge to myself and my conversations, that if I could do that, I would see myself as being equal to others. That was my challenge. So
what does equal to others mean? I mean, that's an interesting one too, right? I mean, this is all in your head and your perception. I often say that for me, it was how I perceive myself, how others perceive me, but then there's the how I perceive how others perceive me, which it sounds like it's really more of the third that you're talking about, the equal to others.
Yeah, so I think let's dig into that one. So pre-accident, I'm playing football. I'm professional. I'm getting paid to do that. You also had another job back then. Today it's full-time professional athletes. So I was very comfortable in my skin, very comfortable. And accident, not comfortable, very uncomfortable. You know that I'm grateful again that I can have this conversation with you, knowing that we've been down a similar path. So when you're that uncomfortable, then you have a lot of conversations, and then you don't see yourself as being, well, I can't speak for you, but I didn't see myself equal to others at that time because I was reliant on people to keep me alive, number one. Two, to assist the transition out of intensive care to a general ward. Now we're talking about, for those who are unfamiliar, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, hydrotherapy, all the pieces that you know. And then it's getting you out of there to open up that bed for the next person who's about to come into it, right? So that's when I went from very comfortable to very uncomfortable. And now you pushed me out and I went back to live with my parents. So, broken, that's the right language, and parents, the nest, if you will, to get you to a point where you mentioned a little bit ago that you're able to go and do your own, fly again, go and do your own thing. So the hardest part for me was with my conversations, and again with others, and the look of others in their eyes, you would be maybe familiar. Then there's always that, maybe it's a bit of pity, or maybe it's a bit like you're a young guy and you're in the wheelchair. And, I remember one lady saying to me one time, she just stopped me to say, I just want to talk to you for a bit. And she was telling me about all of her pain. Now, my dad brought me up, parents, dad in particular being this, that you're always very respectful, that you never swear. And if you did, that resulted in a discipline. Let's suppose it wasn't a clap. So, you learned those lessons early, right? So back to this lady, and I was like, excuse me, do I know you? Do you know my parents? So I was trying to, and after a while she said, no, but you understand my pain. And I said, how is that? She said, because you're in a wheelchair. So she made an assumption that because I'm in a wheelchair, I'll be more than happy to spend time listening, adding into, oh yeah, I understand pain. Yeah, the world's horrible and, I got it, but let me add some more fuel to the fire. And so you can start to see that for me, I could branch off to two different types of people. People who want to lift you up and take you forward. Very grateful that I've met many of those, but we need to identify them, right? That's key. We need to identify them. Equally, there are people who are more than happy to pull you down and take you backwards. They exist in all of our. So that was a turning point for me, Chris, to go, do you know what? If back to my conversation, if I could take on that challenge and if I could do that, then it doesn't matter what anyone ever says to me or a look from anybody, wherever I go, that I know that I'm equal to others. And that was my benchmark. And therefore, after that, I felt very comfortable in my skin, Chris, and I was very comfortable in the wheelchair. And but I needed to challenge myself in order to be comfortable. So when I say comfortable, and then the next challenge, which is the question that you shared, I was just going then for a recovery swim and just enjoy myself. So nowhere near the intensity of training for an Ironman. And I just met this guy randomly who'd swum the channel. And he was in the local paper. And I just went up to him to say, congratulations, that is awesome. For nothing more to acknowledge what he had achieved. And he said, I equally heard that you've done the Ironman. I would like to acknowledge that as well. So, and then he simply said, you know what? I'm a lawyer. I swam in this pool up and down. And then I went and had a crack at the English Channel and I made it. So that means that if I can do that, so can you. And that's simply how that next opportunity was presented. And then the question again, right? So now there's a picture. Okay, so what would that look like? That's me swimming from one country to another. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to use that as a vehicle to inspire kids in wheelchairs around the world? That's what I was thinking. Okay, so what do I need to do? I was lucky enough to meet the head of Gatorade here in Australia, a guy called David Knight, and perfect timing again. So he said, what do you want? And I said, I want to swim the channel. And then I said, I want to inspire kids in wheelchairs and I want a documentary. And so David became my support swimmer. And guess what? The documentary was shown around the world. And I'm hopeful that maybe some kids saw that. It doesn't necessarily have to be kids in wheelchairs, but you would hope that people would see that and they would lift them up. Because when I recently watched your Kilimanjaro effort, it lifted me up. It was like, do you know what? I'm inspired by people who take on the challenge of life. So that was the example of the channel at the time.
And yeah, I think you totally hit on it, right? Because sometimes it is dealing with, whatever demons or whatever we have as well, like that they come and find us in those most challenging moments, and knowing, hey, you know what, I've been successful. I mean, I have a little reminder that I have framed in my office that reminds me, and one we certainly share, I recovered from a broken back. It's like, okay, yeah, there will be challenges in life, but that was a fairly profound one. And we have to be able to, that's sort of that sense of equal. I often think that confidence to me used to be about what I could do. And then the flip of that is that it's knowing that I can handle whatever's going to come my way. And it sounds like that's exactly where you ended up with both Ironman and then the English Channel. But the English Channel to me, I mean, mentally sounds as difficult, if not more difficult than Ironman, because one, you're going from point to point, but you also don't know how the tides are going to affect you. So it's not a fixed distance that you're going. So say a marathon is 26.2 miles. This could be 26.2 miles. This could be more. It could be less, depending upon how you swim through these currents. But then also the the busiest shipping area in the world. So you've got major, like you are the proverbial insect running into the windshield, and you're a long way from shore like that. I mean, I know that you had David as a support guy and you had people around you, but at the same time, like you're a long way from home. I mean, in a human sense, this is some of like what makes a nightmare in a lot of ways. I mean, this is sort of the opposite of like getting claustrophobia in the tiny little tunnel, but it's the same kind of thing, that you're in this gigantic space and you can't find your way home. How was the mental journey of swimming the channel?
So you remember I said I couldn't swim. I didn't swim. I used to run. So running was 100 meters or 200 meters. Okay, so I breaststroke the first triathlon. We shared that. So now it's like, okay, this guy has presented me with an opportunity or a challenge. That's what he has done. So now I have a choice to say, it's okay. I'm going to bathe in the Ironman glory for, I don't know, in the bubble of the sport of triathlon. As you know, we're all in different bubbles, whatever we're into. That's an example of a bubble. And I thought, okay, then I did some research, because that's important too. There needs to be a why around what you do. I shared with you that the why was to see myself as being equal, was the why. What was the why for the English Channel? That no athlete had done both the Hawaiian Ironman and the English Channel. I could possibly be the first in the world, irrespective of chair, to have done that. I now know why, because it's as opposite as black is to white, as hot is to cold. I mean, they're diametrically opposed. So it was a big challenge. And then I thought, are you up to the challenge? Does this excite you? Does this light you up? Does this give you, you start to dream again, right? So like, to me I thought about kids in wheelchairs in my 4 months in the spinal unit. I knew I had to do something. I wasn't sure what it was, but it started to take form. And therefore, if there's a vehicle in that process to inspire, then maybe we need to capture that in order for it to be put into a documentary, in order for it to be National Geo and Discovery and sold globally. You need to do something. So therefore, do you have the courage to take the first stroke. That takes a lot. So now we want to get uncomfortable because let's talk about Ironman's comfortable because you've done it, right? Or you won the Super Bowl, so you've got the ring, or you've done whatever it is. So now it's like, I'm going to be comfortable, right? Maybe it's Jordan in a chair smoking a cigar, or Arnold, or whatever that, you relax. And then I thought, wow, imagine that. And so this dream started to take off and started to get momentum. So then I was like, okay, I need to go to the pool. I knew I could swim 2.4 because that's part of the Ironman, but could I do more than that? So I went to the pool by myself, wheelchair at the end, got myself in, swam up and down, up and back. And then I got out. So as I was drying myself off in my chair, a gentleman walked up saying, hi, my name's David. Hi, David. What are you doing? I said, I'm swimming. I thought that might have been obvious, kind of a bit cheeky, right? And then he said, I'm a swim coach. Are you training for something? He might have thought, just a local meet for a guy in a wheelchair. I said, yeah, I'm going to swim the English Channel. He said, do you have a coach? And I said, no. He said, now you do. You can start to see, I want to use this as an example, that once you set your sights or your scope on exactly where it is you want to get to, not maybe, but exactly, then people just start to come in. And if you're aware of that, then you can determine whether they're the right people to have on board. I mentioned David Knight was my support swimmer because he ran Gatorade and he was going to invest $100,000 for a documentary. He wanted to be my support swimmer, so you're in. Other support swimmer, Wally Brumiak, had done Ironman and many other things, so he was in. And it starts to come to life. So when I put on 20 kilos, which is 44 pounds, I trained in winter here at 9 degrees. I'm not sure what that equates to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to do the math, but it's 9 degrees. Yeah, it is cold. It is cold. I mean, that's it's like 9/5 plus 32 or something like that, if I can do the math, right?
So let's just say that it's cold. And the reason I was able to swim in that really cold water is because I had trained for it. I'd put on the weight to stop myself going hypothermic. That was the challenge.
8.2 degrees. That's not warm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was training in at its coldest at the lakes in Penrith where I lived at the time. So that's when I started to keep on thinking, Chris, and to come back to the question, if I could do one lap, then maybe I could do two. And then maybe I could do more. So then I have a methodology, and that's access a mentor is key. So why not ask a man who I know of, haven't met, but I know of, who swum the thing 19 times. So I reach out to him. His name was Des Rempert. He's passed away. He was so excited to be a part of the team because someone had taken the time to reach out. He was never going to come and knock on my door. I had to have the courage to reach out to him. So how you kind of start to formulate a team to support. So on my first attempt, the conditions got very rough, and I was pulled out after 9 hours of swimming. So no one got across on that particular day, and I couldn't sleep that night because I was thinking I failed, right? I couldn't sleep. So the next day we went to the captain at the local hotel, which he would have a beverage. And I said, I'd like to have another chance, and can I buy you, a pint? And gradually, he came around to say, I'll try and slot you in again. So 13 days later, I got a second chance, and we got across in 12 hours 55, and the conditions were kinder. And I swam about 50 kilometers in terms of, as you mentioned, currents and tides and not point to point. So it was a long day in the office, but it's a beautiful metaphor to encourage others if they choose to chase a dream. Because if you have the courage to start, you might even catch it. You have many examples in your what? Then it is possible. And therefore, if it's possible for me, it's possible for others. But they need to find the thing that lights them up, right? You can't do it because someone else thinks it's a good idea. It has to be a good idea, and it has to light you up. So at that time, that's the thing that lit me up to want to be the first. That was the why. We did raise a lot of money. We did start a foundation to help kids in wheelchairs. So, and that then led to Sydney. And the Sydney part, to kind of come back to where we started, was if I could represent my country, the why was, how special that would be to, to represent at a home games or Paralympic Games. So that was the challenge after the channel.
Right. And then you made the finals of the 1500 meters, which meant that you got to do the demonstration event at the Olympics and wear your country's colors as well. That and that to me is one of the, there's a lot to get there. And there's a lot to, obviously you had fitness, you had drive, you had the ability to suffer, but being fast in a wheelchair meant that you had to develop the technique. You had to figure out the strategies of being in the pack, which is a really big challenge. So to me, I mean, I think it's funny. Do you feel like there's a it's in ascending order of importance in your mind, or is there one that stands out more, like looking at Ironman, looking at the channel, looking at the Paralympics, qualifying for the Olympics, competing in the Paralympics, eventually winning a Paralympic medal in rowing? I mean, you've demonstrated proficiency over a wide range of things, which is really probably one of the most impressive things.
Yeah, so let's have a look at the Paralympics was the focus. So I wasn't thinking medals, Chris. I was thinking, if I could make the team. If I could make the team and compete, that would be special. So it turned out, you might recall, or was here for Australia, that in order to get an A qualifier, you needed to equal a silver medal performance from the previous games. That was for us here in Australia. That was the standard. So when I had the opportunity, then we found out pretty late in the piece that there was going to be that demonstration event at the Olympic Games, and you had to qualify for that, and that was in Switzerland. I learned, and you're one of the guys I ran into, it's like, ask questions. And nobody, and rightly so, saw me as a threat because, well, first thing I needed to do after swimming the channel was to lose, 44 pounds, which it took me, 5 or 6 weeks to do that. And I just switched on to the fact that I worked out, what I needed to put on weight is to eat a lot, and therefore to lose it, well, don't eat a lot, and to start to exercise in a different way. So that was number one. So it's always important to go, what are you chasing? And I was chasing to represent. Okay. So as part of that chasing, I got a chance to spend some time with Heinz Fry in Switzerland. I'm not sure you had much time with him, but what a guy. Like, what a guy. And I was just asking questions, and I spent time with Jeff Adams. Jeff in Canada. I had some family in Canada, so there was a natural link there. And again, I'm just, hey, what works for you? What's the best type of chair? What do you find the push rim size? What's the glove? And again, I'm the guy who doesn't have a history in wheelchair racing, so I was like, well, you know what? I use this glove, or I push this particular chair. So there's nothing like trial and error, and then you kind of work out what works for you. But I looked at a lot of the guys, and I thought, these guys are phenomenal. They are the best of the best, and they've spent years honing their craft, and they're very competitive. Jeff, as you would know, I mean, you know what, he dominated, right? And if you get on the way, he'd do his best to mow you down. And I like that, coming from a rugby background, that it's competitive, right? So, okay, I'll try. I'll see what happens. So we set the bar at trying to represent. And as it all unfolded, I managed to qualify in the 4x4 relay for Sydney, the 15, the 5, the 10, and the marathon. So I had all this on my plate. What I learned was the guys who focused on 1, possibly 2, generally those are the ones who picked up the medals versus the ones who are doing. But also taking a step forward to have that opportunity to compete at a home Olympic Games in lane 1, doesn't matter what your name is, in front of 110,000 people. That was really special. So after that whole experience of competing and being honoured to be able to represent, remember that was the dream. When the rowing piece came up, then I needed to changed the dream. I wasn't just representing, it was, are we capable of doing more than representing? So in answering your question, I think Ironman and Channel are way up there because they are at that stage, what one would consider wheelchair sports, right? You had to open the door. Having the opportunity to represent, I'm very grateful for. So I was always into what I was into, Chris. So, now I'm into something that's completely different. So I'm grateful that Ironman was a challenge, because I'd say that was the hardest thing for me to do, to find myself. And I think when I did that Nepean triathlon to cross the line with Amanda and Jack as a husband and a father, and certainly tapped into an athlete piece in order to cross the line together, that's the one that meant the most.
So you went back and you did the Nepean triathlon, but then you did it again where you were able to do it without the wheelchair, right? So this is what you're talking, and that brings us into, because you said after Ironman that you felt equal in a lot of ways, but that's the conflict for so many of us, who are probably all of us, who have had this kind of a spinal cord injury, this kind of a traumatic injury, where you don't recover completely, right? If you break your arm, they put it in a cast, your arm heals, and then you're fine. But if you break your back and damage the spinal cord, it doesn't work that way. This is an injury where, in some ways, to your point, it's like you stay injured afterwards. But the Ironman gave you that sense of equality. But the thought for all of us is that the only way to recover is to walk out of here. And so you were able to do the Nepean triathlon as a walker. But how did that work? Because the Ken Ware neurophysics therapy is a little bit different. I mean, I've read about it, and I can't say that I completely understand it. So maybe you can describe how this could work to actually get you to the point where you left the wheelchair behind, as you're doing in your logo, right? Where your shadow is the wheelchair and you're walking away, which, but anyway, how does this therapy work? How do you make it work?
So I want to introduce again, an opportunity was presented. I think if we took the time to unpack your story, there was pivotal moments that opportunities were presented. So a gentleman will do Ironman into Ken Ware into Nepean, if that's okay. So I have the foundation that I'm a part of, the John Maclean Foundation. From that first swim of the English Channel, Nike made a contribution of $20,000. We've now converted that to $4 million, which helps kids in wheelchairs around the country. So it's about providing opportunities for those kids. One of the ambassadors for the foundation, a gentleman called Pete Jacobs, won the Hawaiian Ironman in 2012. So world-class athlete. He was injured. We happened to bump into each other closer to his home. He said, I'm going to go and see this guy. I've done the convention, osteo, physio, nothing's worked. I'm a professional athlete. I make my living. So he went up there limping, and 3 days later, he came back sprinting. It's hard to get your head around, right? So this is a non-spinal cord conversation, but that opened the door for me to Ken. And he said, you have to go and see this guy. So initially, Chris, for me, having a sore shoulder from, I guess, repetitive, maybe handbike or swimming or wheelchair racing with you and all that stuff. So that's I thought that he might be able to help my shoulder. Nothing more. So the initial conversation. So it's important to remember at the start I shared that I could hobble around on crutches, Canadian crutches, taking the weight of my left leg, my right side more paralyzed than left. My dad challenged me to the point of, and I used to drag myself around a lot and just exhaust myself. So that's when Dad, how far can you go? Accept the chair. So that's brought us up to this point. So I go and meet with Ken. Ken basically said, what do you want? Isn't that a beautiful question? We often don't ask ourselves that question as we age. because we get busy with life. And I said to him, I'd like to walk on the beach with my wife. You asked me a question, that's my honest response. May not be able to do that, but you asked me, that's my response. So he said, okay. So now we go back to trying. The little boy within has been presented with a challenge. So do you have the courage to try? It's very daunting to start. So number one is, for me, and I can't speak for others because only they can speak their truth, their story. He gets you to close your eyes. So you would have done many lap pull downs over the years, Chris, where you kind of put your neck forward and there's a pulley, there's a butt. Okay, so now think about a dual pulley system. So there's one, kind of here and one here. So now you've got your eyes closed because that's important. And what you're trying to find is your middle ground to be equal and even. Okay, so let me just touch on it a little bit. I've got my eyes closed. I'm sitting upright. I'm in the position he wants me to be in. He's guiding me through this, so that's important because often you open your eyes and you stop doing it because it's uncomfortable, right? You talk about getting uncomfortable. This is very, very uncomfortable. So I'd have my hands up, my eyes closed, trying to think about, everything where it needs to be. And then he'd say, just let it go and hold the resistance. And as you're holding the resistance in your mind, you're building stuff up which isn't there. So now it's perception versus reality. Okay, so, like this feels like a house. I'm holding up a house and you're not. You're just resisting 5 pounds or whatever the resistance is. And then over a while, he would say to me, John, are you in the middle? Try and be equal and even. So again, eyes closed. And Chris, I said to him, absolutely. So then you think about, I'll try and do it in the screen here. So I've got my eyes closed and he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. He said, open your eyes. So now there's a mirror and I see this. But with my eyes closed, they were 100% equal and even. So what do we learn here? There's a disconnect with what's actually happening here and what's happening in here. So then he made an adjustment. So let's go the opposite. Now close your eyes again. So eventually over time, you're trying to find this plane of being, so the two hemispheres of the brain, now we're trying to communicate with those. That's why you switch off the visual cortex. So you're closing your eyes. And you're trying to find whether there's anything with my injury and remembering that I'm incomplete. So that's important to say that would be a very different outcome for someone who was complete versus incomplete. So now we move to the legs. So this is now really scary, right? Because I haven't done any resistance on them for many years, as in 25 years. That's a long time. And he said, you're okay, close your eyes. So it's like a leg press. No weight, but... And then it's okay, like it didn't snap. And there was something there. And so over time, so now we've got resistance here. We're upright. We're at the beach. So this is building up to. So think upper body as well as, lower body as what I can use. And then he drew a line in the sand. And he said, do you have the courage to try and take the first step? That's a yes or a no. For most of us, we'll find an excuse not to, right? Because that's uncomfortable, right? I want to stay in my chair, give me my coffee, I'm happy, leave me alone. Where's the remote? Kind of, this is the complete opposite of that. So I took a couple of steps as best I could with my existing paralysis. And I fell over. And then he said, make some changes. Let's do this different. A few more steps, fell over, back to the start line. And then eventually I had the opportunity to hold my wife's hand and walk on the beach. So what do we learn? We learned that I perceived that to be impossible. When I was challenged, I was capable. He then said to me, you were always capable, you were just unaware. Because now we go back to 1988, which is when I had my accident. There was not MRI technology to say, this is the damage in the core, in the spinal cord. And I did try and do my best on those Canadian crutches, as I've mentioned, and in the parallel bars initially. And, I fell over many, many times. So the piece there is that I was capable of more. And like you with Kilimanjaro, it was sitting there. It's like, it's ticking away, right? It's ticking away. And that's when I dreamed again, Chris, and I purposely bring that up again, because I was like, imagine if I could go back and finish what I started 26 years later, using my legs this time. And I got some assistance. There's a company called in Melbourne here called Neuromuscular Orthotics. So kind of carbon fiber leg-based technology, initially out of the military, US military. So very grateful for that technology. And then walking poles. So now we start to work towards Nepean, and there was a team to support. The swim obviously was not a problem. I didn't have to breaststroke. The bike was challenging, but we got through it. And obviously, if your pelvis is supported, you're just trying to do all you can with what you have, which I was able to do. And then it was the 6-mile walk. And, let's break that down. Right pole for balance, left pole, get through right leg, right pole, get through left leg. And then over a long period of time, we managed to cross the line. And here I was to pass the poles to my friend David. And Amanda and I and Jack held hands, and we crossed the finish line. So what do we learn from that? We learned that I had closed off that door many years ago because I saw myself as, John Maclean, wheelchair athlete. And someone challenged me, Ken Ware, to say, maybe there's more. Do you have the courage to explore that? And I'm grateful that I did, Chris, because that was the pinnacle. You asked that question a while back. That was the pinnacle because it took all of my background, all of my experiences, all of the challenges to create a team to see whether I was up for the challenge. And it was really tough. And it's absolutely not for everybody, making that very clear. If someone with the exact same injury, they could absolutely get that as a result, but he or she may not want to take on that challenge. So that's how I kind of transitioned to learn to, I still use my wheelchair. That's very much a part of my life. But there are times when I can get up and put on the carbon fiber braces and do my best to walk around.
Were you more prepared for the identity change? I mean, had that been the sort of evolution? I mean, you're talking about embracing the challenge, embracing what you hadn't allowed yourself to believe you could do, but you'd gone from being a football player, and that was your identity, to suddenly being broken effectively in the hospital, a huge identity change. But then you built that up and were successful. It's where you, as a wheelchair athlete, it's where you made your living. And then suddenly, in some ways, I mean, it can be perceived this way, right? That you were successful in that realm, and then you walked out of it. Were the emotional identity journey, had you prepared beforehand? Did that happen as you were doing the therapy? Was it part and parcel in some ways with the therapy that one had to complete the other in order for you to be successful?
You're right. A lot of us hold on to our identity, and I identified as a professional, as you mentioned, a professional athlete. Then that was crushed. There was a transition. Then I identified as a wheelchair athlete. I was very happy to say that because I was very proud of the experiences that I explored with others, very comfortable in that space. And back to Ken, he said, who are you and what do you do? I said, well, my name's John Maclean. I am a wheelchair athlete. And that is autopilot. And I'll keep on saying that to you without even thinking about it because it's embedded into my psyche. And then he said, do you still want to be that person? He said, he's thought-provoking. So I said, what does that mean? And he said, wouldn't you just be happy with being John Maclean? And that's a pretty famous name in the US. And obviously Die Hard 1, 2, 3 just kept on going with Bruce Willis. And sometimes people would say, John Maclean, right? That was kind of a ha-ha thing. And you're right. I would present as a presenter in my wheelchair as having done a few experiences. And therefore that puts me into the transformational or change space. So there's conferences around the world. And therefore, are you prepared to lose that identity? And the answer to that was yes. Like, sure, let's just be me. But what that actually did, Chris, again, it's another door to close consciously. Like I need to stop saying wheelchair athlete, be thoughtful of that. The example is when you and I and many others learn to drive a car, we were paying attention. That's a brake, that's an accelerator, that's a seat. You know what I'm saying? And then over time, autopilot. So was I prepared for that identity change? Well, yes, I was. And then, so now I'm so, hi Chris, it's John, great to see you again. But imagine if I didn't know your backstory and you didn't know my backstory. I would hope that I would still want to be connected to you because I like you, irrespective of either of our backstories. You're a nice guy, I like you, and therefore, so that you can start to see that some people get so caught up in their identity of being an athlete or however they present. So I always like this idea about today's an exciting opportunity. What can tomorrow look like? Is there an opportunity to cast a shadow for others going forward? So I'm very much mindful of that, but also by saying to some people at some stages, you know what, imagine if I did nothing. I'm completely happy with that. Let's delete yesterday and everything before that. So it's a blank canvas to start with. So you talk about being human, that's being real, that's being raw. So there's no bias towards what you may or may not have done previously. But the fascinating part about presenting is when I'm able to stand up from a presentation and take some steps, if I didn't accept the new identity, I wouldn't have been able to take those steps. So you can see so I'm very proud of what's happened, but I'm very real in the art of being human, right? I don't live there. I don't get caught up there. And therefore, it's always about the next challenge for me. What do I have to look forward to? Because that helps me get excited about chasing the next dream. And I think if someone wants to say, how would I identify you? Like, who are you and what do you do? I'm a person that gets excited about working towards trying to be better.
Looking forward as opposed to looking backwards in a lot of ways.
Yeah, remember you mentioned the bug kind of on the windscreen. So I try and look out the windscreen because if you spend too much time in the revision mirror, you're going to crash. So
I think that's great. That is, I mean, it really is. It's an amazing journey, but an amazing journey of embracing change. And change to most of us is the scariest thing that we can ever imagine. Is having to change. We know how things go, and change is painful, but embracing that process of change is also remembering that if we don't continue to change and we don't continue to get better, that entropy effectively sets in, right? And we just effectively get worse. And I've always thought that the best way to not get old is to continue to learn and dream and grow. And you most assuredly are embracing exactly that, John. So thanks for an amazing example. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. I think, the people that I look up to are the people that are still moving forward. And I met a gentleman doing the Ironman back in the day, Jim Ward. Now, Jim Ward was 80 years of age, 80, lining up to do the Ironman in Hawaii. There are people that I always look up to, not the ones who win the races, they're the ones that are still trying. So whether it's just the people that believe in themselves to give themselves that opportunity. And, I saw something recently with the World Masters Athletic Games. There was a gentleman, I think he's a tide. He was like 106 years of age. He was doing the 60 meter. He was doing the 100 meter. These are the people who lift me up to go, they're still doing it, right? The body's designed to be moved. What do I know? As you know, that if you don't use your mind, it'll start to atrophy. And if you don't use your body, very quickly, so we're designed to move. And if we can keep on doing that and keep on being intellectually stimulated, there's growth, and growth is exciting, because to be stagnant, you start to slow down, and very quickly, you're talking about maybe the good old days, where you're talking about when.
Is that the way that you wake up in the morning, or is there a mantra? Is there a process? that gets you into that mindset?
So that's important. So I would look at a challenge. I got into the sport of sprint kayak. I was watching the Paralympics, and that really lit me up. And I thought, I wonder how I'd go against these guys. So it was a new challenge, right? So the best in the world is a guy called Curtis McGrath. He won the gold in sprint kayak. And so there's the benchmark. He took a year off last year. So I was able to make the Australian team, went to a World Cup, and then I raced against Kurt this year. And I missed the qualifying standard by 1 second over 200 meters, but that's what it is. And in sprint, that's what it is, as you know. And Kurt beat me by about 4 seconds. So I got an answer to my question. And the question, I wonder how I go against the good guys. Well, he's 22 years younger. I'm not making excuses, but I was able to answer a question in my mind. So there are times when I wake up and is jacked a word that you use? You jacked, you pumped,
Yeah, sure. Jacked can work. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if I've got the energy, then I'll apply that energy. But it's not always the case. There's not an endless supply of energy. Sometimes, like you and the rest of the people on the planet, you're depleted, you're tired, you're run down, and you need time to rest. So the next challenge to share with you is ocean racing. So you're on a surf ski. So you've got your paddle. And the race is happening here in Australia. It's in Perth, Western Australia. It's 27 kilometres. So it's a bit of a difference from 200 metres. And that hasn't been done before by a wheelchair athlete. So that excites me. That lifts me up to work towards. There are times it's quite cold here at the moment in Sydney, Australia. So I'm not rushing out of bed to be in really cold climate. I've got time. And therefore, in terms of performance, I need to be right when the race is happening, not right before or after that experience. So I'm the same as everybody else. I like time to rest. I like sitting on the couch and watching a good series. I like my chocolate. I like my ice cream. But then equally, I can switch that off to then focus on, when I need to be in shape for the next challenge. So I think we're all the same in the sense that no one ever wakes up every single day that they're jumping out of their skin. I don't believe so, if they're being honest with themselves. We all need some time to rest, and that's why we sleep.
Exactly. But it seems like there's for you, the special sauce in some ways is that there's always something on the horizon, that there's something that's pushing you.
Yes. Well, it's that, and I want to spark that with you, Chris, and the listeners. If we take the time, we don't always, because we can find an excuse to pick up a device or whatever the example is. But when I was thinking about it, I thought, I love paddling. I love being on the water. So it's back to nature. If you look at a lot of the stuff I've done, it's not all just kind of wheelchair sports stuff. There's stuff that I wanted to challenge myself outside of wheelchair sports. And Dad's question, coming back to that, was, son, how far can you go? Well, I'm still going. Am I doing it for anybody else? No. Our son, Jack, is turning 13 in August. And it kind of fits in for me to be in and around to do what I can for him, to be in and around. So that's not taking away. He plays soccer or football. So I'm there for all of those experiences. But there's also time for me when the time's right to be able to do something to look forward to. And I think it's back to that success model. Something for yourself, something for your family, something for your business, something for your community. And when I look at a given year, if I'm able to put energy in those 4 areas, to me, that equals success. So there are things that pop up, and sometimes they don't. You're having a bit of a break, and that's fine. We've got family holidays coming up in New Zealand, which I'm really looking forward to. I don't have to go and do anything, just be around, and for as long as Jack wants me to be around, or us to be around. But yeah, I think having something to look forward to really gets the best out of me, because I can get excited about that, and that then gives me an opportunity to, and ultimately, Chris, there's going to be a response here. There's a documentary crew going to film this thing. Either you did or you did not complete the challenge, right? And if I don't complete the challenge, well then, maybe Mother Nature's playing a part in that. because it's open ocean. But I will never know the answer to that question unless I try. And what did my dad and mum say to me as a little boy? We don't care if you win or lose. We don't. We just want you to try your best. So if we take that and if I'm saying to my son, I just want you to try your best, mum and I want you to try your best, and I'm not trying my best, I'm not a very good example. So I'm very fortunate in the sense that life has taught me that it's a journey. Sometimes there's going to be highs, and I've had some extreme highs. And sometimes there's going to be lows, and I've had some extreme lows. And meeting you is certainly a high, and you meet some beautiful people along your journey. So I've tried to make the most of the cards that were dealt, Chris.
I think you're exactly right. It's interesting that you mentioned your son, as long as he wants you to be around, because he's 13. Things start to change a little bit sometimes. What is the story that Jack tells about his dad?
This is kind of funny, right? This happened recently. So the kids at the school that he go to was able to talk about, what do you want to do as a career? So, some of the school kids said, I want to be a doctor like my dad, or I want to be. So Jack's time comes, and he still cracks me up, Chris. He said, what would you like to do? He goes, I want to be like my dad. And the teacher says, what does your dad do? He said, nothing. So for him, in particular, off the back of COVID, pre-COVID, dad's in America or dad's in Asia or dad wherever dad is. But he saw dad for a period of time where, I don't need to go to an office. I don't. So he would see, dad going for a paddle, or dad going to a cafe, or dad's home when I go to school. And when I come back, dad either picks me up or drops me off at school, or dad's around is the point. And in his mind, dad doesn't do anything. So I want to be like him. I'd like to go to a cafe. I'd like to, I don't know. So I think in time he'll learn that there's a bit more of a backstory for dad that's allowed him to be in the position that we find ourselves in. But we always thought that was kind of funny. I mean, I don't want anybody to get hit by a truck. And he'll learn in time that he's got to run his race. And, when we say at the moment, because all of us, back to the time when you and I left home, there was a time when we did do that. We started to spread our wings and fly, and he'll do the same in time. But for me, because people often ask, what is the expectation for your son? And the answer to that, in my eyes or in our eyes, is that we want him to be him. I don't care if he doesn't want to do sport. I just want him to find the thing that lights him up, because if we can get him onto that path sooner than later, then hopefully it's at least heading him in a direction that he'll ultimately, work towards. No expectation of anything that his dad has done. So, he'll find his path, and we'll look forward to being there to support him along the way.
That is awesome. I mean, it sounds like you're doing your job as well. And I want to be like dad in a lot of ways sounds like what you're talking about with family, that, hey, you might say dad did nothing, but dad's around, dad's part of the family, dad's part of the community. And that really is a high compliment, certainly from a 13-year-old. So John, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate you joining us, and, early morning in Sydney, end of the day here in Utah, but so amazing to connect again. So thank you. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. The greatest gift you can give us is to tell your friends. Tell your friends, tell your family, tune in. Please like us, please follow us, please subscribe, and we'll continue to bring you great content. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Take care. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.